He was once a lion cub and recognized his rescuer after 7 years. Minutes later, something sad happened. 7 years ago, a helpless lion cub lay on the edge of death, thin, dehydrated, and forgotten by the world. A man stumbled upon him in the wilderness and, against all odds, decided to give him a second chance at life. He bottle-fed the cub, stayed awake through endless nights to keep him alive, and when the time came, he released him back into the wild where he truly belonged. Everyone believed that was the end of their story, but fate had other plans. 7 years later, in the vast African savanna, the lion, now a powerful adult, did the unthinkable. He recognized a man who once held him in his arms. What happened in those few precious minutes left everyone in tears, because no one was prepared for the tragedy that followed. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss more inspiring and emotional stories about courage, resilience, and the unforgettable bonds between humans and animals. The sun was sinking behind the endless grasslands, painting the African horizon with deep shades of red and gold. Daniel Harris, a 34-year-old wildlife conservationist from Colorado, had been in Kenya for 6 months working with a local team to monitor the dwindling lion populations. It was grueling work, but for Daniel, it wasn't just a job, it was a calling. He had always believed that the most powerful way to protect wildlife was not through cages or control, but through respect and coexistence. That evening, exhausted from tracking a small pride through the thick bush, Daniel heard a faint sound. At first, he thought it was the rustle of wind through the dry grass. But then it came again, a weak, almost pitiful cry. He froze, scanning the savanna around him. The sound carried with desperation, cutting through the stillness of the evening air. Carefully, Daniel followed the sound, pushing past thorny acacia shrubs and uneven ground until he reached a small clearing. His heart clenched at the sight before him. There, lying helplessly on its side, was a lion cub, no more than 3 or 4 months old. Its ribs protruded through its fragile body, its breathing shallow, and its golden eyes half closed with exhaustion. Daniel knelt down slowly, not wanting to frighten the tiny creature. He looked around, hoping to spot a mother lion hidden in the tall grass, but the landscape was empty and eerily silent. He knew the truth even before he admitted it. This cub had been abandoned. Whether his mother had died or rejected it, the result was the same. Without intervention, the little lion would not live through the night. The cub let out another faint whimper, so weak it barely stirred the air. Daniel's chest tightened. Every rule of conservation told him not to interfere, that nature should be allowed to take its course. But standing there, watching the helpless cub's body tremble with the effort to breathe, he couldn't walk away. He whispered softly, "Not tonight, little one, not on my watch." Daniel carefully slipped off his jacket and scooped the cub into his arms. The little body was frighteningly light, fragile, like holding a bundle of bones wrapped in fur. The cub stirred weakly, its tiny paw pressing against his arm, as if clinging to life. That touch was all the confirmation Daniel needed. He turned back toward the base camp with determined steps, holding the cub close to his chest. The walk back was long, and every minute felt like an eternity. The cub's breathing was shallow, and Daniel kept whispering to him, trying to keep him awake. "Stay with me. You're stronger than this," he murmured, his voice both a plea and a promise. When he finally reached camp, his colleagues stared in shock. "Daniel, you can't bring that here," one of the Kenyan rangers protested. "If the mother is nearby." "She's not." Daniel cut him off firmly. "He's been left to die. We can't just ignore this." The ranger shook his head. "If we intervene, we take responsibility. Do you understand what that means?" Daniel looked down at the cub, whose eyes flickered open for the briefest moment. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I'll take that responsibility." Inside the small field tent that served as their medical station, Daniel placed the cub on a blanket and quickly set up a makeshift feeding bottle with warm milk substitute meant for orphan animals. The cub was too weak to drink at first, its head lolling to the side. Daniel coaxed him gently, pressing the bottle to his mouth, whispering words of encouragement as if the cub could truly hear him. Finally, after a long moment of stillness, the tiny creature latched on. The sound of weak sucking filled the tent, and Daniel's eyes burned with relief. From that moment, everything changed. The team gave the cub a name, Koa, meaning warrior in Swahili, a nod to his fragile but fighting spirit. Daniel became his constant guardian. He stayed awake at night to make sure Koa fed every few hours, cleaned his wounds, and kept him warm with hot water bottles tucked inside blankets. He learned to read the cub's tiny signals. The flick of his ear, the twitch of his tail, the way his golden eyes would brighten for just a moment after drinking his fill. Days turned into weeks, and against every odds stacked against him, Koa began to grow stronger. His legs, once too weak to hold him up, learned to stand and then stumble awkwardly around the tent. His mewling cries turned louder, demanding attention, food, and care. For Daniel, every milestone felt monumental. The first time Koa managed to walk across the tent on his own, Daniel laughed out loud, clapping like a proud parent. But the work wasn't easy. Some nights Koa refused to eat. Other times, illness threatened to undo all the progress they had made. Daniel endured the exhaustion, the frustration, and the doubt. Many of his colleagues believed Koa would never survive long enough to be released. "You're just prolonging the inevitable," one of them said quietly after a particularly rough night when Koa had collapsed again from weakness. Daniel looked at the cub curled up in his arms and shook his head. No, he deserves more than inevitable. That conviction carried them through. Daniel devoted every ounce of energy to Koa's survival. Slowly, the cubs were thickened, his muscles filled out, and the once fragile creature began to look like the lion he was meant to become. He learned to play, swatting at Daniel's shoelaces with sharp little claws, and he learned to roar, or at least to try, producing tiny growls that made Daniel laugh until tears filled his eyes. Through it all, a bond was forming. Daniel knew he wasn't supposed to get attached, that Koa would eventually have to return to the wild. But when the cub would curl up against him, purring softly in sleep, Daniel couldn't help but feel the connection growing stronger. It was as though Koa knew he owed his life to the man who refused to let him go. As the months passed, Daniel began training Koa for the inevitable day of release. He introduced him to hunting instincts, letting him practice stalking small prey, teaching him to rely on his own strength. The more Koa grew, the more Daniel reminded himself of the truth. This was never meant to be permanent, and yet, as he stood one evening watching the young lion chase a butterfly across the savannah with unrestrained joy, Daniel felt a pang of sorrow deep in his chest. He knew the day would come when Koa would no longer sleep beside him, no longer look at him with those golden eyes filled with trust. The cub was becoming a lion, and lions belonged to the wild. But Daniel also knew something else, something that would stay with him long after Koa returned to the savannah. In saving the cub, he hadn't just given Koa a chance at life. Koa had given Daniel something just as powerful in return. A reminder of why he had chosen this path, why he had dedicated his life to the wild. And though Daniel didn't know it then, that bond, the one formed between man and cub in those fragile early days, would return him in ways he could never have imagined, because 7 years later, fate would bring them face to face once more. The morning air was crisp, carrying the earthy smell of damp grass after the night's dew. Daniel stood on the edge of the sanctuary reserve, staring at the horizon where the golden fields stretched endlessly. Behind him, the camp buzzed softly with the usual rhythm of daily duties. But for Daniel, this day was unlike any other. It was the day he had been dreading for months. The day Koa would take his first steps into a life without him. Koa was no longer the fragile cub who once fit easily into his arms. At nearly 2 years old, his body had grown strong and muscular, his mane beginning to sprout in darker shades along his neck. Every movement radiated the promise of the lion he was destined to become. But to Daniel, every time Koa looked at him with those familiar golden eyes, he could still see the tiny, helpless creature who once clung to his jacket for warmth. The other rangers gathered near the transport enclosure, ready to assist. They had prepared a large open-release zone, far from human settlements, a place rich with prey and water, an area chosen carefully to give Koa the best chance of survival. For weeks, Daniel had prepared Koa for this moment, reducing human contact, encouraging him to rely on his instincts. Still, Koa always came back to him, brushing against his leg, growling softly for attention, pressing his head into Daniel's chest as if asking him to stay. Daniel crouched by the cage, where Koa paced restlessly. His massive paws thudded softly against the dirt, his tail swishing in agitation. Daniel reached his hand through the bars, letting his fingers brush against Koa's for one last time. The lion paused, tilting his head, and leaned into the touch. Daniel whispered, his voice cracking despite himself. "You're ready now, warrior. This is your world. Go make it yours." One of the rangers signaled. "It's time." The gate swung open. For a heartbeat, Koa hesitated. He looked back at Daniel, ears twitching, as if searching for reassurance. Daniel forced a smile and gave a nod. Slowly, Koa stepped forward, his massive frame moving with cautious grace. Then, as if something deep within him clicked, he broke into a powerful stride, bounding across the field, his muscles rippling with each movement. Daniel watched until Koa became a blur against the horizon. The sound in his paws faded, replaced by the emptiness of silence. His chest tightened, his throat aching with the weight of letting go. The rangers clapped him on the back. "You did the right thing," one said. "He'll survive out there. You gave him a chance." Daniel nodded but said nothing. The truth was, it felt less like triumph and more like heartbreak. That night, lying in his tent, he thought he heard distant roars carried by the wind. He closed his eyes, imagining Koa's voice among them, strong and defiant. It was both a comfort and a torment. Months passed. Daniel continued his work, tracking prides, documenting their behavior, and working with local communities. But a part of him was always somewhere else, wondering if Koa had found his place, if he was thriving, if he even remembered the man who had once carried him from the brink of death. News of Koa reached him occasionally. Rangers reported sightings of a young male lion moving with confidence across the savannah, learning to hunt, fending off hyenas, even clashing with rival lions for territory. Each report filled Daniel with pride and a quiet ache. Koa was no longer his cub. He belonged to the wild now. Years slipped by. Daniel returned to the United States for stretches of time, giving lectures at universities, raising awareness about conservation. But no matter where he went, the memory of Koa lingered like an echo. He carried pictures, faded images of a golden cub curled against his chest, of the day Koa had stumbled after him across camp, of the first time Koa had tried to roar. They were reminders of a chapter in his life that had shaped him as much as he had shaped Koa. 7 years later, fate intervened. Daniel returned to Kenya on a special mission, this time working with an expanded team to evaluate new protected zones for lions. He was older now, his hair peppered with gray, but the fire in his eyes burned just as strong. The savannah felt both familiar and foreign, like stepping back into a dream half forgotten. One evening, as the team set up camp near the edge of a river valley, distant roars echoed across the plain. The sound rolled like thunder, deep and commanding. Daniel paused mid-step, his heart racing. Something about the roar struck him, powerful, yet strangely familiar, as if carried from the past. The rangers noted the sound with routine interest, marking the territory on their maps. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling clawing at him. Could it be? After all these years? The thought seemed impossible. Yet deep inside, a spark of hope ignited. The following morning, Daniel sat alone at dawn, moving carefully across the terrain. The air was cool, the sky streaked with the pale colors of sunrise. His boots pressed softly into the earth as he followed the tracks, a set of massive paw prints leading toward a cluster of acacia trees. And then he saw him, standing in the clearing. Framed by the golden light of morning, was a full-grown lion. His mane was thick and dark, his body massive and powerful. He radiated authority, a king surveying his kingdom, but it was the eyes that stopped Daniel cold. Golden, piercing, familiar. Daniel's breath caught. "Koa!" he whispered. The lion's ears flicked. His head turned sharply toward the sound. For a tense moment, silence hung in the air. The lion lowered his head, his gaze fixed on the man before him. Daniel didn't move, his heart pounding. He knew the danger. This was no cub, no dependent creature. This was a wild predator in his prime. But then something happened that defied all logic. The lion stepped forward. slowly at first, then with growing certainty. His massive paws pressed the earth with deliberate grace until he stood just feet away from Daniel. The air between them seemed to vibrate with recognition. Koa leaned his head forward, brushing it gently against Daniel's chest, the same way he had as a cub so many years ago that Daniel's eyes blurred with tears. He placed a trembling hand on the lion's mane, his voice breaking. "You remember me." For long moments, man and lion stood together, their connection unbroken by time or distance. Daniel felt the deep rumble of Koa's purr vibrating through his body, a sound of trust and familiarity. It was as if the years melted away, bringing them back to the days of sleepless nights, of milk bottles and whispered encouragement. But just as quickly as the miracle unfolded, shadows began to stir the edges of the clearing. Hyenas. At least 6 of them, creeping low through the grass, their eyes gleaming with hunger and malice. They had been trailing the lion, waiting for weakness. Daniel's breath caught again. He knew the danger. Hyenas were relentless, cunning, and cruel. Even a strong lion could be overwhelmed by numbers. And Koa, for all his strength, was alone. Koa turned, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. His mane bristled, his teeth bared, and in that moment, he was every inch the warrior his name proclaimed. The hyenas circled, cackling, snapping their jaws. The air crackled with imminent violence. Daniel stood frozen, torn between awe and terror. He had just been reunited with the lion who had once been his cub, who remembered him after all these years. But fate was cruel, and within minutes of their reunion, danger loomed, threatening to tear it apart. The hyenas moved in a wide arc, their laughter carrying through the grass like broken glass. Daniel's stomach dropped. Koa stood between in the threat, mane bristling, his golden eyes lit with fury. He was no longer the helpless cub Daniel once carried. He was a warrior now, but even warriors could be outnumbered. One hyena tested the air, creeping forward. Koa lunged with a roar so powerful the earth seemed to vibrate. The hyena jerked back, tail tucked, but others pressed forward. They were calculating odds. Daniel knew what that meant. A single lion could be broken down if they found a weakness. Daniel's instinct screamed at him to back away, but his body refused. His hand fumbled inside his vest until his fingers closed around a signal flare. With a snap, fire erupted in his grip, hissing and spitting sparks. He swung it low across the grass. The hyenas hesitated, their confidence shaken by the sudden light. Koa didn't wait. He charged, striking the nearest hyena with a paw so heavy the animal spun away yelping. Dust exploded around them. The rest of the pack snarled, circling tighter. Daniel could feel their hunger pressing in like a wall. A sharp chirp echoed from the tree-line. More hyenas answering the call. Daniel's blood ran cold. Reinforcements were coming. He pressed a radio at his collar. "Base!" This is Harris near the acacias. Lion in contact with hyena pack. Need flares and backup immediately. Static crackled, then a voice. 10 minutes out. Stay clear. Stay clear. As if he could. He glanced at Koa, who stood over him like a shield, and tightened his grip on the flare. The first real strike came fast. A hyena darted past Koa and lunged at Daniel. Koa pivoted, muscles coiling, and slammed into the attacker. Teeth flashed, claws ripped. The hyena's jaws caught Koa's foreleg before it broke free and fled howling. Blood darkened the lion's golden fur. Daniel's heart clenched. He couldn't unsee the crimson streak, the prophecy of their reunion. Minutes later, something sad happens, hung in the air like a curse. Then the ground betrayed them. Koa sprang forward to counter another rush, but his paw caught in the grass and snapped tight. A steel cable buried and hidden, whipped taut. A poacher's snare. The lion roared in shock and pain, thrashing against the wire. Each pull cut deeper into his leg. No! Daniel dropped beside him, flare clenched between his teeth, hands scrabbling at the cable. He yanked his multi-tool open, blade shaking as he set it against the wire. Koa's eyes locked on him, recognition through pain, and he stilled for half a second. Just enough. Daniel sawed. The steel fought him, slicing his thumb. Blood blurred his grip, but he kept cutting. Hyenas hovered at the edge of firelight, waiting for weakness. "Hold on, warrior," Daniel whispered. "I've got you." Strand by strand, the cable began to fray. Koa's body trembled with fury, but he held, trusting the man beside him. Daniel could hear the Rangers on the radio. 2 minutes out. He ignored it. He couldn't think about time. Only the blade, the wire, the lion's breath hot against his cheek. Then the cable gave with a sharp snap. Koa staggered free, leg torn and bleeding. He reared, roaring at the pack, sending them scattering back into grass. For a moment, the clearing was a storm of dust, firelight, and sound. The land cruiser barreled into view, siren wailing, Rangers leaning out with fresh flares. Hyenas peeled away, snarling but unwilling to face steel and fire. The danger ebbed like a tide. Koa limped to Daniel's side, blood dripping from his wound. Despite the chaos, he lowered his massive head and pressed it gently against Daniel's shoulder, the same gesture he had once made as a cub. Daniel's throat closed. The Rangers jumped out, one raising a tranquilizer rifle. "He's hurt. We need to treat him." Daniel hesitated. Tranquilizers were risky with a wounded lion, but leaving him meant infection and certain death. He nodded once. "Do it. I'll keep him calm." The dart hissed into Koa's flank. The lion flinched, teeth flashing, then softened under Daniel's hand. His eyes drooped. Slowly, he lay down, breath heavy but steady. Daniel pressed a hand to his mane. "Sleep, warrior. We'll fix you." The Rangers knelt quickly, gloves ready, checking the wound. "It's bad," one muttered. "Not hopeless, but bad." Daniel's chest ached with the weight of it. He had just been given back the lion he thought he'd lost forever, and within minutes, fate had reminded him how fragile life could be. He looked at Koa's face, peaceful in drug sleep, and whispered, "I won't lose you again." And then, in the distance, a gunshot cracked the morning wide open. The gunshot shattered the calm like glass. Birds burst in the acacias, wings flashing white against the sun. Daniel's body dropped by instinct, shielding Koa's neck. The lion, drug-heavy and bleeding, jerked under the weight but stayed down, chest rising in slow, ragged breaths. Poachers, Kamau, the driver, swung the Land Cruiser broadside to form a shield. Asha lit another flare, slicing the grass with firelight. The hyenas melted into the brush, their mocking laughter silenced by the louder threat. Daniel raised his head, eyes finding two silhouettes on the ridge, men with rifles, watching. The first shot had been a warning. The next would not. "We need to move him," Asha hissed. Daniel's heart hammered. Koa's leg was still bleeding, bound only by a rough bandage. The tendon was intact, but exposed. He pressed his hands into the dressing. "If we shift him too hard." "Leave him here and he's bait." Kamau, "Cut in." He yanked a heavy tarp and poles from the truck. "We drag him. Now." They worked fast, sliding the tarp beneath Koa's massive body, threading poles into makeshift loops. Daniel guided the lion's head, whispering, "Easy, warrior. I've got you." A second shot rang out, striking the truck's fender with a metallic scream. Dust sprayed Daniel's cheek. Kamau slammed the horn, siren blaring, trying to buy seconds with noise. The poachers on the ridge didn't retreat. They studied, waiting. The winch cable pulled tight, dragging Koa inch by inch toward the tailgate. The tarp creaked under his weight. Every jolt sent Daniel's stomach lurching. He never let go of Koa's mane, speaking steady words even as his own breath shook. Another bullet hissed past, close enough that Daniel felt the air split. Asha flinched, but didn't stop pressing the bandage. Kamau cursed under his breath, hands white on the winch. And then came a new sound, the growl of engines. Motorbikes. Two riders burst from the scrub, scars over their faces, rifles slung across their backs. They circled the clearing like vultures. Asha snatched the bullhorn and shouted in both English and Swahili, "Kenya Wildlife Service. Armed unit en route. Leave now." Her voice cracked with force, but the riders only idled, calculating. Daniel's throat dried. He could sprint, throw himself in front of them, or he could stay with Koa. It wasn't a choice. He pressed harder to the lion's shoulder and muttered, "Stay with me, just a little longer." The winch groaned, lifting Koa's body toward the tailgate. The lion twitched, a groan slipping from his throat even under sedation. Daniel steadied him with both hands, feeling the tremor of breath that still meant life. The bikers hesitated. From the distance came sirens, real rolling, growing louder. The anti-poaching unit. The men exchanged a look, then revved their engines. Dust spat as they wheeled away, swallowed by the horizon. On the ridge, the rifle silhouettes broke apart and vanished into the heat shimmer. Relief swept the clearing, sharp and fragile. "Finish it," Kamau ordered. They did, hauling Koa fully into the truck bed, strapping the tarp tight. Daniel climbed in beside him, planting a hand on his chest to feel the stubborn thud of his heart. The cruiser roared forward, rattling over ruts. Every bump made Koa groan. Daniel braced the lion's head against his thigh, whispering, "Hold on, warrior. Don't let go now." At the sanctuary gates, staff surged forward. White coats, gloves, a gray-haired vet leading with calm precision. She looked once at the wound and barked orders. Oxygen, fluids, antibiotics, prep surgery. Daniel jumped down, hands shaking. "I'm not leaving him." "You can stay," the vet said, brisk but kind. "But you follow every word I give." Minutes later, Koa lay on a steel table under harsh lights, his great chest rising in shallow waves. Daniel scrubbed his hands raw and stood at the lion's head, murmuring softly, "Remember me, Koa. Remember the nights I kept you warm. Remember the milk bottles. You're not alone." The vet worked with her team, cleaning and stitching with ruthless focus. "The tendon's intact," she muttered. "That's luck. If infection sets in, it won't matter. The next 2 days decide everything." Daniel's eyes blurred, but he kept talking, voice low and steady. "You're stronger than this. You've always been stronger." The vet glanced up once. "If he crashes, do we resuscitate?" "There are risks." "Everything," Daniel said without hesitation. "Do everything." The surgery stretched on, each minute carved into Daniel's chest like stone. At last, the vet straightened, pulling off her gloves. "It's clean. He has a chance." Daniel sagged against the table, pressing his palm to Koa's brow. The lion's body was warm, alive, for now. But even as relief swept him, Asha stepped in from the gallery, her face tight. The rangers swept the ridge. They found 3 more snares. And a mark. The same poaching ring you testified against 2 years ago. Daniel's stomach sank. He looked at Koa, stitched and bandaged, fighting for breath. "Then this isn't over," he said, voice like steel. "First we keep him alive. Then we make sure they never touch him again." Outside, the sun slipped lower, turning the savannah red. Inside, Koa's chest rose and fell, each breath a fragile promise that the story was far from finished. The sanctuary was quiet at night, but Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat cross-legged by Koa's enclosure, eyes fixed on a lion who had once been a cub in his arms. The surgery had gone well, but the vet's words echoed in his head. The next 48 hours decide everything. Every flicker of Koa's flank, every hitch of his breath, felt like a test Daniel wasn't sure they could pass. He spoke softly into the darkness, as he had done when Koa was tiny. "Do you remember, warrior? The first time you walked across camp? You stumbled so much, but you kept going. You didn't give up then. Don't give up now." The lion's ear twitched. His chest rose and fell in a steadier rhythm than the day before. Hope flickered in Daniel's chest like the first spark of fire on cold tinder. But the world outside the sanctuary was not quiet. The anti-poaching unit had warned them the ring responsible for the snares was still active. The gunmen hadn't vanished. They had retreated. "They'll try again," Asha had said grimly. "Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not next week. But they don't let go easily." Daniel had nodded. "Neither do I." Days passed, heavy with waiting. Koa's wound began to close. He could place weight on the leg for short moments, leaning on his strength the way Daniel had always known he would. The vet marveled. "He's healing faster than most. Something's driving him." Daniel smiled faintly. "It's memory. He remembers why he has to fight." By the 3rd week, Koa could stand unaided. By the 5th, he was walking, slow, deliberate steps around the enclosure. Daniel followed him with his gaze every second, pride swelling in his chest. To watch him rise again was to witness the wild itself refusing defeat. But the sanctuary gates were not built to be prisons. Koa had been born for Savannah, and Daniel knew the time was coming when he would have to let him go again. The thought hollowed him, but it was truth. That truth arrived sooner than expected. It was dawn when the alarm went up. 2 motorbikes spotted near the outer perimeter, the same sound that had once haunted the clearing. Armed men were moving fast. Daniel grabbed the nearest radio. "Lock the south gate. Get the unit here now." He didn't wait for the reply. His legs carried him toward Koa's enclosure. The lion was already pacing, as if he could sense a storm brewing beyond the fence. His eyes found Daniel's, burning with the same fire they had carried 7 years before. "You feel it, don't you?" Daniel whispered. "You always did." The bikers roared closer, shots cracking against the metal gates. Staff scattered for cover. Daniel pressed his palms to the chain-link fence that separated him from Koa. The lion rumbled, low and furious, tail lashing like fire. The gates held for now. The unit's sirens wailed in the distance. But Daniel knew seconds mattered. If the poachers breached, they wouldn't just be hunting lions. They'd be killing to send a message. He turned, heart pounding, and shouted to Staff, "Open the inner gate." The vet's eyes widened. "Daniel, no." "Trust me," he cut her off. The staff hesitated, then pulled the lever. The inner gate clanked open. Koa surged forward into the holding yard, his injured leg stiff, but his stride still magnificent. He threw his head back and roared, the sound splitting the morning into light and shadow. The poachers froze at the gate, rifles wavering. For the first time, Daniel saw hesitation flicker in their eyes. The sirens grew louder. Trucks barreled into view. The poachers turned, engines screaming, retreating into the brush with the same cowardice they had shown before. Dust swallowed them whole. Silence fell again, broken only by Koa's heavy breathing. Daniel stood in the yard, heart hammering, watching the lion who had once been a helpless cub stand as protector, as king. Asha approached slowly, rifle lowered. "You knew he'd do that." Daniel nodded, eyes never leaving Koa. "He doesn't need me to fight his battles. He just needed me to remind him who he is." The Rangers secured the perimeter. The danger had passed for now. Daniel knew the war against poaching was far from over. But in that moment, with Koa standing tall in the rising sun, victory felt real. Weeks later, the final decision came. Koa was strong, his legs scarred but functional. He prowled the enclosure with restless energy, gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the fences. The sanctuary could protect him, but it could never contain him. The release day mirrored the one from years before. Daniel stood at the gate, hands pressed to the steel, eyes locked on the lion who had once fit inside his jacket. His throat tightened. "I've had to let you go twice now, warrior. Both times it's broken me. But you belong out there. And maybe we'll meet again." The gate swung wide. Koa stepped forward, pausing just long enough to brush his head against the fence where Daniel stood. Then he moved into the savannah, stride steady, mane catching the light like a crown. Within minutes, the grass swallowed him. Daniel remained long after the others left. He stared at the horizon, the place where golden fur had disappeared into golden fields, and let the tears fall freely. Asha's voice broke the silence. "You gave him his life twice. That's more than most men can say." Daniel shook his head gently. "No, he gave me mine. Every time I looked at him, I remembered why this work matters, why hope matters." He turned to the camera crew who had been recording for the Sanctuary's awareness campaign. His face was streaked with dust and tears, but his voice carried the conviction of truth. "If the story touched you," he said, "remember this. Courage and loyalty are stronger than fear. We can't give up on these creatures, because they never give up on us. Subscribe, share, speak out, help us protect them. Because somewhere out there, a lion like Koa is waiting for someone to care enough not to walk away." He looked back once more at the savannah, where the sun rose high and the grass swayed like an ocean. Koa was gone to the wild, but not gone from him. Their story lived on, in memory, in scars, and in the unbreakable thread between a man and the cub he once carried. And Daniel knew, with bone-deep certainty, that even if he never saw Koa again, the warrior would remember him forever.